and welcome back to building a web application from scratch. My name is Matt, and in this video, we're going to be creating our user services. So let's go ahead and create a new task. I'm going to call this create user services. Set that to in progress. I'm going to assign it to myself, and we're going to add it to the backend authentication epic. Click submit. And perfect. We got our user service. So what we're going to do is let's go ahead and go to our text editor. And first thing we want to do is let's go ahead and delete this and create a fresh terminal. And let's go cd into our backend, cd into our nest server. And then we're going to run nest or npx nest generate service. And this should create our user service for us. So you can see these two files were created. So this user service.ts is what we're going to work on. So for a little bit of context, a service is really just this middle area of our application that sits between our controllers and our data layer, right? So whenever someone, either a UI or another server, makes a request to our server, so through an HTTPS call, right, calls an API that we build, it's going to go to our controller, which is going to handle that request. And then if it needs to do a particular action, right, containing some business logic, it will then send out to the service, which will perform that action, do that business logic. It can either interact with our database or manipulate some values, whatever it may need to do, right? So in our case, create users, update users, things of that nature, right? So it can interact with that data layer. And then when it's done completing its task, it can then return back to our controller. And it can either return back a successful response or a failure. It can, return an error. It can do multiple things, right? So it's really just where that, like, I'm actually doing stuff, I'm taking action on the server once an API call is made. That's what the service does. So let's go ahead and import our necessary libraries and documents. So we're going to import inject model. We're going to import model. We're going to import our user and user document. And we're going to import our create user DTO file as well. So let's go ahead and now we're going to create a constructor, which is going to allow us to say inject model user.name private read only user model, and then we're going to close it up. So this lets us inject our user model, right, our user schema into our service, call it user model, and it's of a type of user document, right? So it lets us use that user schema inside of our service. All right, so now let's create our first service. Create a user. So we're going to say async create. We're going to name our variable DTO. So that's going to contain our user object. We're going to say create user DTO. So we're going to use that user DTO file that's already going to handle our validation. I'm going to say promise, meaning that we're going to either return a user document or a failed error. I'm going to say const user equals await this user model, create DTO. And then we're going to return a user. Oh, we don't want to do all that. All right, return user, and that's all we need to do, right? So we're going to pass in that create user DTO file, and then we're going to, assuming it passes validation there, we're going to use that to then create our user and return them to our controller. So next thing we want to do is we want to say find user by email. So we're going to go ahead and say async find by email. I'm going to say email is a string. Again, we're going to return a promise of user document. And in this case, we're going to return a null if we don't find the user. So, and we're just going to do this all in one line. We're going to say return this dot user model dot find one, and we're going to say email dot to lowercase. Go close all that up, and then we're going to say dot escape, and that just ensures that we have a clean promise return where we're going to make this just ensures that we get that user document or null or error response, right? So just make sure we return a clean promise after we retrieve that user document. Okay, so next we're going to find user by email and include password. So we're going to say async find by email with password. We're going to return that user document or null again. And then we're going to say return this dot user model find one. So it's going to be the same thing. But in this case, we're going to say email to lowercase. I don't like that format. Let's do it all in one line. Find one. We're going to say email dot to lowercase. That way we can then close this. All right. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say dot select. And we're going to add that password. So we have to say plus password. And then we'll add that escape as well. And let's go ahead and clean that up. There we go. So this now finds that includes that password field that we have set to not be returned unless we explicitly define it. And then we clean up our request. Alrighty. Next thing we're going to do is let's find user by ID. So let's kind of just move through this now. Find by ID, call it ID, return that user document or promise. We're going to find by ID, ID. Right, so the difference is instead of find one, there's a specific find by ID function that we can use from Mongoose, and it lets us easily find that ID. We're going to find user by username. Async find by username, promise, user document, null. And we're going to say return this dot user model find one, username to lowercase, escape. And we want to use that to lowercase just as we did with the email because it's going to allow us to avoid errors in the future. Close that up. And then let's go ahead and say we're going to find user by password reset token. And then we're going to say async find password reset token. Yeah. Promise user document null. return this password reset token, close it. Right? So again, it's really the same functions every time, right? We're just finding one based off of different values and returning them. The only major one is where we're adding our password. And we do need to add our reset token and our expires, right? Because if you look at our user schema, right, these are select false. And so we do need to add those to our response as well. All right. So that's really all we needed to do to create our user services. In our next video, I think we're going to create some services for our accounts. So I don't know if we're going to be creating our authentication controllers immediately next, but it is coming up. And so just for your information, right, that we're not going to have, not all of our user services, or sorry, our user controllers, right, need to call these. We're actually going to create our login, and our registration controllers are going to be part of our auth, our auth domain, that auth route. And so they're going to call an auth API, which is going to then access these user services to be able to communicate with the database. But you want to have them separated in this way because it separates the responsibility, right? Our user services particularly interact with our user collection inside of our database. So that's all we need to do for today. Let's go ahead and go back over to our task board, move this over to completed. I'm going to mark it as completed. I'm going to come to our GitHub, and I'm just going to say added user services. I'm going to commit those files, push them, and there we go. We're all set. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.